to be here. I know these three gentlemen for, oh my God, 10 or 15 more, 20 years almost, in some cases by reputation, longer than when I met them. And I've been coming to visit Laszlo's lab, and then that side when it was set up every 2 to 3 years for the last 8 years or whatever, ever since Laszlo moved here. And it's an enormous honor, and it's wonderful to see you all, see the variety of disciplines and young and older faces, and I'm going to spend the afternoon here, and I'm looking forward to it. I have about 45 minutes of remarks, so we can do this University of Chicago style. You can raise your hands and ask questions. If it were truly the University of Chicago, you already would have interrupted me. And then if it's taking too long, I'll just manage and keep moving. I'll cut you off. Anyway, thank you, Laszlo, for that very generous introduction and for all of your contributions to the field. As you all know, humans are embedded in social networks, and these networks obey very fundamental mathematical, biological, psychological, and sociological rules. And gaining insight into these rules, I think, gives us new opportunities to intervene in social systems and to make the world better. If we can really understand the structure and function of human social networks, we can, in my view, devise various kinds of policy interventions that work both online and offline to different types of problems and different types of applications. So today I'm going to give you a quick introduction to some of our work on the biology of networks, and then spend the bulk of the time on social network interventions, experiments, field experiments we've been doing, organized in a certain way to understand how to intervene in the world. Because in the broadest sense, taking embeddedness in networks seriously shifts the focus to what is known in economics as the externalities of the intervention. What I'm interested in is not so much what happens when you treat somebody or some subset of people with an intervention, with a treatment. I'm interested in the response to treatment, not among the treated, but in the response to treatment among the untreated. I want to know what everyone else does in a population when you target focused individuals, which necessarily arises because, in fact, of our embeddedness in networks. Now, I'm interested in real social networks, the kind we humans have been embedding ourselves in for tens of thousands of years, and not just the recent online variety. And here's what real social networks look like. This is a bit of Coles to Newcastle. Every dot's a person, as you all know. Every line represents a relationship. This is an unweighted graph. The colors indicate different kinds of relationships, and it's an undirected graph. Of course, you get much more complex, as you all know. But the question is, these networks, to my eye, are intricate things of beauty. And they are so elaborate and so complex and so ubiquitous, in fact, that one has to wonder, what purpose do they serve? I mean, why are we embedded in networks? How do they form? How do they work? And how do they affect us? And I've spent the last 20 years or so researching how and why human beings form social networks and how they affect our lives, our health, our wealth, our desires, our feelings, our thoughts, and our actions. Now, part of that work has involved an investigation which has fed into the book that Laszlo just mentioned that I'm done with, but I'm going to kind of polish up at least to go to production, which is addressing the question of why humans form networks at all. Why do we have friends? I mean, it's not hard to provide an evolutionary account for why we mate with each other. Many animals, not all, but many animals mate with each other, have sex with each other. But not only do we have sex with each other, but we also befriend each other. We form long-term, non-reproductive unions to conspecifics. It's very rare in the animal kingdom. And the fact that we form friendships and many other animals do not, elephants do, certain cetaceans, certain but not all primates, and us form long-term. And we're not unlike the clonal insects, which are all the same. We form connections to genetically dissimilar individuals, unrelated individuals, suggest that maybe natural selection had something to do with the deep topology of human networks. That is to say, across the course of evolution, natural selection has not just shaped the structure and function of our bodies, not just the structure and function of our minds, but the structure and function of our groups. And the network topology on which everything else we build, the internet, Facebook, Twitter, telecommunications, all of that is grafted on top of and in the service of a deep fundamental reality which pre-existed all of this engineering effort. So part of our effort has involved trying to understand the biological basis, the genetic basis of human social interaction. Now, to just set the stage for a very quick introduction to like 2 or 3 of our 5 or 10 papers on this topic, I'm just going to put this, everyone probably knows every damn thing on this slide in science, but in case there's an undergraduate or someone who doesn't, This is a network of college students, actually, and who are their real friends. There are a number of ways you can quantify the location of individuals within a network, and three basic ways are the degree of a node. So B has 4 connections, and D has 6 connections. That's known as the degree of a node. But you can also look at, for instance, nodes C and D. C and D both have 6 connections, but there's a difference between the two, and of course that's defined by the centrality of a node, how central a node is in the network. And you can cultivate this situation by recognizing, for instance, that if an epidemic began stochastically in this graph and spread, it would be better to be node D than node C. That C is going to be more likely to get whatever's spreading and get it sooner. Incidentally, if you want to go on a slight tangent, it suggests from an evolutionary perspective that individuals who are friendlier should have stronger immune systems. Because actually, if you think about it from natural selection point of view, you could either evolve to hate people and stay away from them, or you could evolve and therefore not get contagious illnesses, therefore have maybe a weaker immune system, or to befriend other individuals, but then you need to have a stronger immune system. Anyway, C and D are different by their centrality, and A and B both have 4 connections, but the difference between the two is, of course, that A's friends are friends with each other, whereas B's friends are not. This is known as the transitivity of the node. And in one of our first papers to look at this now almost 10 years ago, we did a simple twin study design quantifying the extent to which those 3 parameters were heritable, could be explained by your genes. On the y-axis is the percent of the variance explained, or the heritability, and then the 3 quantities I just described, and it says that 46% of the variation in how many friends you have can be explained by your genes. Now that's not very surprising. It just says some people are born shy, and some people are born gregarious. People vary in their taste for friendship. But we also found that 47% of the variation in your transitivity could be explained by your genes. And this is a very bizarre result, because what I just told you is that if you have Tom, Dick, and Harry in a room, whether Dick is friends with Harry depends not just on Dick's genes or on Harry's genes, but on Tom's genes. Whether you two are friends with each other depends on your genes. How can that be? Well, we think the reason is that people vary in their tendency to introduce their friends to each other. Some people knit the networks around them together, and some people keep their friends apart. And this kernel of an idea relates to another whole set of insights in biology having to do with niche construction theory, for example. And finally, 29% of the variation in how central you are in the network can also be explained by your genes. And here we think that people vary in their tendency to befriend popular other individuals. Some people want 4 friends who don't have any other friends, and some people want 4 friends who have many other friends, for instance. Now, this means that the fundamental reality for our desire for connection and our susceptibility to social influence has always been with us. And where you are in this vast fabric of humanity depends in part on your genes. And my lab has been amassing evidence that it is indeed not a coincidence that we form networks with particular topological and dynamic properties. We've shown that there is an evolutionary significance to and heritability of social network structure and function, and that phenomena like peer influence and also like homophily actually have a very ancient and fundamental significance. I don't have time to go into it, but if you look at conventional accounts for homophily, which is preferential attachment to individuals that you resemble, not the influence process that might occur across the tie, the conventional accounts in psychology are something like, why do we befriend a company of people we resemble, prefer the company of people we resemble? Because we're more comfortable in their presence. Why are we more comfortable in their presence? Because they resemble us. It's really a tautological explanation, actually. And it's a challenge to provide a kind of account from evolutionary biology as to why, in fact, we could have evolved as a species to prefer dissimilar others. Why do we prefer to hang out with people we resemble? It could be advantageous to do the opposite. And there is, we believe, a reason for this, and we have a nice modeling paper and some work in progress with Feng Fu, who's in applied math in Dartmouth on this topic. Well, we believe that across evolutionary time, the benefits of a connected life should necessarily outweigh the costs. Now, if it's the case that social network structure has these genetic antecedents, it suggests that if we could go back 10,000 years ago and map the social networks of the people who we were, let's say 10,000 years ago, perhaps those networks should look like our networks. But we can't do that, so instead we hit upon the alternative idea, which is to map the social networks of a group of people that lives as we did 10,000 years ago, specifically the Hadza hunter-gatherers of Tanzania. So in partnership with Chromatic, one of my postdocs at the time, who had familiarity with working with the Hadza, we created a photographic census of all living adult Hadza. There are only about 1,000 of them left, They have no material possessions to speak of. They hunt and they gather for their food around Lake Ayasi in Tanzania. And we made this kind of Hadza Facebook. And Koren took it into the field and just would wait till some Hadza person would walk by. Because you couldn't, of course, schedule an appointment to meet someone. And it might take a week before someone walked by. And then they would walk by and you would ask them who their friends were using a variety of name generators that we did. And then they would leave and then you would wait for another person to walk by. And on and on and on. So we were able eventually to map the networks of the Hadza. And to make a long story short, what we found is both visually and analytically, Hadza social networks look just like ours. So despite the fact that in the intervening 10,000 years we had invented agriculture, we had invented cities, we had invented telecommunications, the deep structure of human social networks in the Hadza looked just like ours in the current era. So network structure seems to have an ancient origin consistent with our work on its partially genetic basis. And in a parallel stream of work, using both observational and experimental methods, we and others had meanwhile been providing evidence that a variety of behaviors and phenomena spread within networks via social contagion or induction and beyond just dyadic ties. So this is also an old topic in the social sciences, at least 100 years old, that periodically goes through these sort of recrudescences. And we kind of re-entered that field ourselves about 15 years ago, doing a work on a bunch of things. But our specific interest was not just on pure effects, but rather on hyperdyadic effects. So if I affect you, it doesn't just stop with you, you then go on to affect someone else. Can we find evidence for such a cascading process in using observational and experimental studies? So we looked at a bunch of stuff, so we have others on obesity, smoking, drug use, and drinking behavior, emotional states, which have an interesting reason to look at those, happiness, loneliness, depression, and altruism. I'll show you one experiment in just a moment. Criminal behavior, others have looked at voting. There was a nice paper James did in Nature with 61 million people or 62 million people randomized on Facebook showing cascades in voting behavior, purchasing behavior, and ideas. And this work supports the claim that people's attitudes, decisions, and behaviors depend in quantifiable ways on the attitudes, decisions, and behaviors of others to whom they are not only directly but also indirectly connected. Now, of course, there's a lot more going on here. I've already alluded to that once. So in the case, for example, of contagion of obesity, several things can be happening, or contagion of any phenomenon, frankly. As we recognized early on, and in fact this topic is also quite old, as discussed and connected. It goes back to like 18th century mathematicians who were trying to figure out, did monks live longer because they didn't have sex? And nuns. Was the whole state of holy abstinence life prolonging or not? And the mathematicians early on figured out that there could be a problem with how you might make this inference. So the number of possible explanations for how Laszlo's attributes might affect mind. One possibility is induction or a kind of social domino effect. He gains weight, it makes me gain weight. Another possibility is homophily, or birds of a feather flock together, or love alike. Here the idea is that it's not that Laszlo's weight gain causes my weight gain, but rather that he and I form an attachment because we have a similar body size or similar interest in food or exercise to begin with. And a third possibility, which was not appreciated by the 18th century mathematicians, they got onto this stuff very early, is an issue of context. Here the idea is that Laszlo and I share an exposure to something like a gym that makes us both lose weight, or a fast food joint that makes us both gain weight at the same time. And typically all three of these are present in any social phenomenon. You know, why are your kids using drugs? Is it because their friends are using drugs? Do the drug-using kids hang out with each other? Or is there a drug dealer in the neighborhood that's pushing drugs on both of them? Why are you buying an iPhone instead of a Galaxy? Is it that your friends are doing it? Do the iPhone lovers hang out together, or is Apple's marketing campaign better than others? So these phenomena are typically present in any social process, and it requires both fancy statistical approaches or experiments to disarticulate these phenomena. So we began doing experiments very early, and the rest of my talk I'm going to just show you one set of experiments after another in intervening in social networks in different kinds of ways. Our first experiment was published in 2010. In this experiment, what happened is groups of college students were brought into the laboratory, and it's a very simple experiment actually, were randomly assigned to groups of 4 strangers who didn't know each other. And they were given a little bit of money and told to play a public goods game. Actually, we took advantage of data that had been collected by other scientists, by Ernst Fehr, an economist in Switzerland. And so he was interested in the role of punishment in getting people to work together. So these group of 4 people would be put together, and they would be asked to play a public goods game. They each were given a little bit of money. If they contributed some of their money to the collective, the investigator would double the money, and then it would be divided amongst the 4 individuals. Everyone would benefit from their altruistic action. Of course, the most rational thing to do is to defect, not to cooperate, hope that everyone else contributes to the commons, and you get the benefit without paying any price. Of course, if everyone defects, the commons collapses, the group doesn't get any benefit, so that's the worst outcome. Best is if everyone participates. But what happened in this experiment is that a bell would ring and the people would be randomly assigned to new strangers to interact with. Or a bell would then ring again and they'd be randomly assigned to new strangers to interact with, and on and on. And what those investigators had looked at was completely different from what we were interested in. What we were interested in is not, if I'm nice to Alex, does he reciprocate the kindness? Direct reciprocity, which is also a challenging topic and has its own long history. Nor were we interested if I am nice to Alex, is then Laszlo nice to me, or indirect reciprocity. Perhaps Laszlo's nice to me because he sees I'm a nice kind of guy. No, what we were interested in is if I'm nice to Alex, is he then nice to David? Could we document a kind of spreading process here experimentally? And that's exactly what we were able to find. We were able to show that if Eleni is kind to Lucas in period 1, Lucas is kind to Erica in period 2, Erica is kind to Jay in period 3, and Jay is kind to Brecken in period 4. And that this kindness spread to 3 degrees of separation here in this experiment. So it's not due to homophily or to context. And in fact, this is another one of the very bizarre results that come out of my lab in the last few years, because what I just told you is that how Jay treats Brecken depends causally on how Eleni treats Lucas, even though neither Jay nor Brecken ever saw or interacted with Eleni or Lucas. So how you two treat each other depends on how they two treat each other, even though you don't know who they are. A beautiful network effect, right? A kind of spreading process in the graph. We're all in this together in a way. Kind of pay it forward is real. And in fact, what we were able to find is that when all the ripple, and this geodesic spread of kindness was distinct from the temporal persistence, such that if Eleni is kind to Lucas in period 1, he learns to be kind. And is kind to Erica in period 2, and Lysander in period 3, and Benny in period 4, Sebastian in period 5, and so forth. And if you fold back all the extra benefit, the downstream benefits from Eleni's initial kindness to Lucas, the network functions as a kind of matching grant, doubling the downstream benefit. And in fact, one of the things that we've been concluding is that that is one of the deep functions of human social networks. That we humans evolved to make networks because networks magnify whatever they are seeded with. That is, in fact, their purpose, is the kind of social magnifying. They'll magnify information. They'll magnify cooperation. They'll magnify emotions. They'll magnify, kindness. But equally, alas, they will also magnify violence and Ebola and misinformation and fake news. And we believe that across evolutionary time, natural selection has made a kind of balancing, shaping the structure of networks so that the positives outweigh the negatives. Now, to be clear, and you're all probably well aware of this claim, we're affected by networks in another way as well. It's not just what's happening around us that matters, it's the actual structure of the network that also matters. So I've been using this example for a very long time, and just think about these two objects. You all know what they are, of course. And on the left, you have graphite, which is soft and dark. And on the right, you have diamond, which is hard and clear. These are two allotropes of carbon. But the key intellectual idea here is that these properties of softness and darkness and hardness and clearness are not properties of the carbon atoms, they're properties of a collection of carbon atoms. And second, which properties you get depends on how you connect the carbon atoms to each other. Connect them one way, you get one set of properties. Connect them another way, you get a completely different set of properties. And we think it's the same with social groups. You can take a group of people and engineer one topology, and that group will manifest one set of properties, or take the same humans and engineer a different topology, and that group will manifest a different set of properties. In fact, it's the ties between people that make the whole greater than the sum of its parts, in our view. And new properties, such as cooperation and violence, health and happiness, and all kinds of others can emerge because of the connections, because of the ties between people, and not necessarily because of the people themselves. So it's not just what's happening to the people around us that matters, it's the actual structure of the network, near and far, that's very important. So with that background, we then, about 10 years ago, began a program of work where we sort of initially were motivated what we called our so what question, and I was also very influenced by Laszlo and David at the time, and Alessandro as well, who's working. They're like, so what? What can we do with insights into networks to make the world better? So we began a program of work that was partly motivated by a desire to make the world better, but also motivated by a kind of desire to have really robust causal inference, to do experiments where we could really be sure as to what was going on. And the predicate of the kind of observational and partly experimental work we had done to that date set us to thinking about three broad ways one might intervene in social networks. So one way one might intervene is to manipulate connection or change the structure of the networks that the people are in. The second way is to manipulate contagion, to say, look, it's very difficult to force people to befriend each other or force people to sever their ties. Let's accept the structure of the network and instead try to manipulate the flows. And the third, very new way, which we've just begun on, and which has involved some of our work on artificial intelligence, and I'll tell you about that in a bit, manipulates position. It says, let's change the location of individuals. Given a graph topology, and given an ensemble of individuals, where should those people be put within the graph so as to maximize or minimize some desired properties? For instance, if you had 100 people and a fixed topology, and 50 were cooperators and 50 were defectors, where should you put them in order to get the greatest amounts of cooperation out of that social system? And to do this, we had to make a number of methodologic advances. And now, over the last 10 years or so, we've done this, of 8 years, and we've released it publicly for public use at breadboard.yale.edu. This is a software suite that allows us to conduct experiments online. We can create temporary artificial societies of real people where the scientists, you guys, us, can think about an experiment using very few lines of code, can instantiate the experiment. This system is integrated with Amazon Mechanical Turk, other sources of crowdsourcing of subjects. You can also use it just with URLs. You can link to workers. You can have people in the room do it if you want. The software is very versatile in this regard. You can post the announcement of the job. You can get thousands of research subjects over the course of the day and do your experiments, and literally by the next day have results from your experiments. You can create temporary artificial societies in which, in a godlike way, you can control the topology, the payoff matrix, the information, basically everything that the individuals experience. And it's publicly available for non-commercial use at that website. So here's one of the first experiments we did with this. This was in 2011 in collaboration with David Rand, who's a long-term friend of the labs. So in this experiment, what we did is we took, there were like 1,000 people, we dropped some fraction of the people into multiple replicates of an Urgis-Renyi random graph with 30% tie saturation, but the ties were fixed. So the people were, we generated the graph at random, people were dropped into the graph, they were introduced to their neighbors, and they were asked to play a public goods game like that one I told you earlier. And the blue ones are the nice people, the cooperators, and the red ones are the defectors. And then they played multiple rounds across time, and we reproduced a result that other scientists had previously shown, although incidentally this finding is against theory, a little side thing, which is sort of interesting, which is that actually cooperation disappeared from this system. By the end, everyone had become a defector. And there are just a few little cooperators on the periphery, not coincidentally, of the network struggling to hold on over here. Why is that? Well, these individuals here, they start out being nice, but they're connected to other people who are jerks to them, who take advantage of them, and they have no choice but themselves then to switch to defection. So in this type of a situation, cooperation disappears from the system. In a different branch of the experiment, we randomly assigned people, different people, to a different topological rules, sort of a different set of connection rules. Now, in addition to choosing whether to cooperate or defect, the people could choose whether to cut the ties to the individuals around them or to keep the ties to individuals around them. And we manipulated the extent to which they could do that. Could they do that 10% of the time, 20% of the time, and so forth? In this experiment, they could do it 30% of the time. And what we found is in that situation, cooperation persists in the system. Defection does not take over the system. So there's a number of other things going on here, but the gist of the point is the following. I can take you guys and I can connect you according to one set of rules, and you're mean sons of bitches to each other. Or I can take you same people and connect you according to a different set of rules, and you're really nice to each other. So cooperation and niceness is not necessarily a property inherent to individuals, it's a collective property that emerges as a result of the structure of the network, which we now have experimentally controlled and can dictate. In a follow-up experiment spearheaded by Hiro Shirado, one of my graduate students, we explored the parameter space of the rewiring rate. So you can think of this as a kind of social fluidity or social rigidity. How many of the ties are up for evaluation and potential formation or cutting at every time step? On the y-axis is a regression-based estimate of the per-round change in cooperation. So more cooperative is up here, less cooperative here. And on the x-axis is the experimentally varied rewiring rate. When there's low levels of rewiring, the graph is fixed. People don't cooperate with each other. And when there's higher levels of rewiring, it goes up, as I told you before. But consistent with some theoretical predictions that Feng Fu had made in a different paper of his, we find that actually the shape is parabolic. And when the rewiring rate is too high, cooperation also disappears again. Why is that? Well, here you switch to defection because the other people are taking advantage of you, and so you have no choice but to reciprocate and sort of punish them by defecting as well. Here you don't invest in your neighbors because at every moment there's a different neighbor. Any given moment, why should I cooperate with you? You'll be gone tomorrow. There's too much turnover, too much fluidity. And stepping back from this and putting on my social science hat, you can imagine that there are many social institutions which exist in our society precisely to put people in the middle range. So for example, think about rules of divorce and marriage. We don't want divorce to be impossible, for you to be stuck in a bad marriage, because if your spouse abuses you, you become a jerk as well. And then you have two people that are abusing each other. But similarly, you don't want divorce to be too easy, where you could just get rid of your spouse at any moment, because you don't make an investment in your spouse. You want a kind of institutions, social institutions, which move people to the middle range, which elicit from them cooperation. And there are other kinds of social institutions that do that as well. Now, here's another experiment of ours that was published now just a couple of years ago that shows some of the kind of ways in which this breadboard can be used to do experiments. It had become very fashionable to debate the causes and consequences of economic inequality, and almost all of the studies, most of the studies, were observational in nature. So looking at county variation from place to place and saying, there's a lot of income inequality here, how's that associated with health, how's that associated with economic growth, is that ripping at the fabric of the society, are people in unequal environments mean to each other, for example. So we thought, well, let's do some experiments using our platform. What we did is we used about, I can't remember now, 1,500 or 2,000 subjects who each only play the game once, so it's very demanding to get all these subjects, but we can do it, and we dropped them into different worlds that we created, and in these worlds, we experimentally manipulated the amount of inequality. So did they have high levels of inequality, a Gini coefficient of 0.4, which is like Morocco or the United States, low levels of inequality, which is 0.2 like Scandinavia, or perfect equality, which is a Gini of 0. And we furthermore manipulated whether or not the individuals could see the wealth of other people to whom they were connected or not. So they always could see their own wealth, but we also manipulated the visibility of the conditions of these artificial worlds. And people were then randomly assigned to be rich or poor. They were given real money to play for real stakes and dropped into these worlds. So there's a lot going on in this experiment too, but here's just a flavor of some of the results. In this experiment here, these individuals are dropped into this invisible condition. The dot size is how rich you are. The dot color is whether blue you're cooperative, red you're a defector. And here the Gini is 0.4. It starts up highly unequal. There are rich people and the small poor people are shown here. The letter indicates what was your status to which you were randomly assigned at the beginning. Or were you rich at the beginning or were you poor at the beginning? And in the invisible condition where people cannot see each other's wealth, what we found is that actually the Gini, the inequality declines substantially. The world become very equal, down to 0.14. The dots are all about the same size, and most of the people are nice and cooperative. Most of the dots are blue. In a different branch of the experiment, we flipped a switch, and we made it so people now could see the wealth of other individuals. So over here, we flipped to the visible condition, same initial starting conditions, counterfactually different individuals, and we find here that actually inequality persists in this type of a world. And most of these guys are jerks to each other. They are red and not blue. And we had some other results in this paper. This broke my left-wing heart, actually, the results here. So on the y-axis is the average wealth of the individuals, or multiplied by n, the total wealth of the population. And on the x-axis is the round. And when I began this work, I really was convinced that what we would find experimentally was that inequality was horrible for these societies. But that's not what we found. We actually found, so the colors indicate the inequality levels, as shown here, the colors. And the dotted lines are the invisible worlds, and the solid lines are the visible worlds. And the punchline here is that inequality didn't make much of a difference. These lines are all very close to each other, but visibility made a big difference. What really mattered was not how unequal the worlds were, but whether you could see each other's wealth or not. Now those two phenomena, inequality and visibility, are very conflated in the natural world. When you go out to do observational studies, how could you hide, how could you have an unequal world in which it was concealed, but actually experimentally here you can do that. And so therefore we find that visibility is much more important than inequality with respect to wealth production. So actually, if you want to get richer, what you need to do is hide individuals' wealth. And incidentally, this work also speaks to certain public policies, for instance, like school uniform policies. Let me show you the other result first. So we also find...
So you mean Boston is better off than California because here the rich people don't show their wealth in California?
Yes, I would say in terms of cooperation and wealth production, maybe, yes.
We're all going to get richer by living in Boston than in California.
Yes, hopefully, yes. When we find the same exact basic story with cooperation as well, whereas the inequality doesn't really affect cooperation as much as the visibility. And it speaks to things like, for example, think about this. What our result, and there's some other complex results in the paper which I won't go into, but things like pay transparency policies. If should you publicize what everyone makes or not? Well, if people make roughly the same, you should actually publicize what people make. But if people have very unequal incomes, our results suggest you should not do that. Or you think about school uniform policies. School uniform policies are like kind of an invisibility cloak. They conceal wealth, right? Everyone wears the same uniform. You can't show off the wealth. Maybe that will improve cooperation in the classroom, for example. Anyway, those are some experiments that look at connection, and I introduced our breadboard platform. Let me transition now to some of our experiments that have been exploring contagion. We've done many experiments of this type, but let me show you a kind of a canonical example on kind of one of our landmark papers, like our plant the flag kind of papers on this topic. So imagine you have two villages in the developing world, and you can map the networks of the village, and you have just enough money to, let's say, target 6 individuals chosen at random, shown here on the right, these yellow dots. And the conventional public health perspective is that you target those individuals, and then you come back a year later, and you see what fraction of the people that you treated with the intervention responded to the treatment. Maybe 3 of the 6 people will have adopted the clean water practice, or the maternal and child health practice, or the vaccination practice, or whatever it is. But that's not what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in responsive treatment among the treated, remember. I'm interested in responsive treatment among the untreated. I want to know what everyone else in the village does when I give those 6 people the intervention. Perhaps 3 of the 6 respond, and maybe they recruit or influence 3 of their friends. A total of 6 people in this village adopt the practice, a latrine practice or whatever. But here, by secular change, perhaps 2 adopt. So the difference between 6 and 2 is a measure of the pure spillover effect. But what this then suggests is that I can then start to use the full armamentarium of network science, which has all kinds of ideas about how to identify structurally influential nodes. So instead of picking 6 people at random, maybe I should pick, for instance, the most trivial example, the 6 most central individuals. Maybe then 3 of the 6 might again adopt the practice, but maybe they affect 30 of their friends. Same intervention, same village, same number of people targeted, maybe 10 times the effect, because of my thoughtful, shrewd selection of structurally influential nodes, chosen according to all kinds of crazy ideas that people in this room come up with. Now, to get this to actually be useful, however, in a public health setting, we'd like to invent a way that allows us to identify structurally influential nodes without the expense and headache of mapping the whole network necessarily. So here we decided to borrow some ideas from an old, and until we, I think, resurrected it, largely neglected paper in sociology on the friendship paradox, Scott Feld's paper in AJS from like 20 or 30 years ago. And that paper showed, and then the physicists afterwards said, oh, well, we already knew that, but we never published it. Okay, thanks.
They did not do physicists.
Yeah, exactly. Published it. Exactly. Anyway, Scott, as far as I know, was the first to publish this idea, which grew from an empirical observation, which is that your friends have more friends than you do. Probably everyone probably knows this, and it's not really a paradox. It's a byproduct of the heterogeneity in the degree distribution, the variance in the degree distribution. Your sexual partners have more sexual partners than you do, by the way. Your co-authors, this one kills me, have more co-authors than you do. And your friends are happier than you are, and it goes on, actually. But anyway, so the average person in a network has mu friends, But the average friend of an average person in the network has mu plus the variance in the degree distribution divided by mu friends. So the higher the variance, the more the difference between the original person and the target individual chosen at random. So you can get an intuition about this by considering the boundary conditions, which again is an idea borrowed from physics. Just look at the boundary conditions. So in the boundary, these individuals have one friend. That's why they're on the edge of the network. And their friends must necessarily have at least two friends. That's why they're not on the edge. Or in some cases, many more than two friends. So you should have the intuition, at least for all the nodes on the edge of the network, their friends should have more friends than they do. Actually, that's the case throughout the graph. If you pick the 6 yellow dots at random, you pick one of their friends at random to the orange dots, those individuals will have higher degree and be more central on average than the original nodes. And the reason this is so useful to us is it means you can identify the orange dots, the structurally influential people, without mapping the network. You can go into a village, pick people at random, have them suggest their friends, and vaccinate their friends rather than the originals. And there was a beautiful paper on this by not Urey, who did that paper? A couple of Israeli scientists. Havlin. Beautiful paper on this that modeled this out and showed that this could work in that type of a situation. So we decided to apply some of these ideas in our field site in Honduras. We worked in a couple of regions in Honduras. This is the Lempira region. It's a very poor part of the world. People here live on less than $2 a day. There are these little tiny villages of like between 100 and 1,000 people. I gave a talk about this work in China a few years ago, and they said, "Oh, let's take you to one of our small villages." I said, "Great." That village had 500,000 people in it. Exactly. And they're small cities. I went to Hohhot. Hohhot has like 7 million people. It's like a small city in China. Anyway, these are actually small villages, okay? They only have like 300 or 400 people in them. What we did is in this situation is to, actually here we had to write some new software, which we've also made publicly available. It's battle tested now. We've used it in multiple sites around the world. Noshir is using it right now in Africa, Noshir contractor. We released version 2.0. Actually, he's beta testing it, the poor guy, for us. And what this software does is it's tablet-based software that has built-in survey functionality. Okay, many people do that, but has network ascertainment functionality. So what you can do is you can do a photographic census of a community, and individuals then, you ask them who their friends are, and this helps with what we call the Maria Hernandez problem. So if you go into these villages and you ask women who their friends are, they will say Maria Hernandez. Well, 20% of the women are called Maria Hernandez. Which Maria Hernandez? So here, as you start typing in Maria Hernandez, it brings up all the Maria H's. That's the one. Click and hit the button. It makes the link. It's perfectly recorded. And you proceed then with the rest of the survey. So what we did is we mapped the social networks of 30, in the first project, of 32 villages. This was like 8 years ago now. We're in the field, I don't know how many years ago, now 7 years. And of 32 villages in Honduras, and then we randomly assigned this third of the villages to get 5% of the people chosen at random to get the public health interventions, so clean water and vitamin intervention. And then this third of the villages, 5% were chosen according to who had the highest degree, and this third of the villages, 5% were chosen according to the nomination, the friendship paradox technique. And then we delivered the interventions. This illustrates how the nodes you picked might vary, this will be obvious to you guys, according to whether they were randomly chosen orange or the in-degree targets yellow, and then the people went out to deliver the public health intervention, and this shows some of the results. This paper was published a couple of years ago now in the Lancet. This is the multivitamin intervention adoption across time. Time is on the x-axis and the fraction adopted is on the y-axis, and to make a long story short, the nomination targeting provides a superior performance in terms of accelerating adoption of the intervention. Now that was a pilot project. It had many limitations, it was a nice experiment, but it had some issues that we wanted to address. So we then, with support from the Gates Foundation, are now rolling out a huge project where we have mapped the networks. I think it is maybe the largest face-to-face mapping undertaken of human social networks. There are 30,000 people in 176 villages in the Copan region of Honduras, in western Honduras. And we have a 2x8 factorial design in this experiment. So we vary the dosage of the people targeted in the village from 0 to 100%, and we vary whether they are chosen at random or according to the nomination technique. And our fantasy, if I come back in 2 or 3 years and present you the results, I know I'm just like these guys with my students. So what we do is we design the study, and we say, at least I do, I think they do too. If it works, this is what the key figure will look like. And we draw it on the board, and then we take a picture, and then we put it there, and we wait till we do it. And then, 8 out of 10 times, I'm right. I don't know what their rates are. 8 out of 10 times, I'm right. So the picture I drew, and I have it from the whiteboard, but now here's a fancy picture. This is what I hope we might find. So on the x-axis is the percent targeted, varied across the village. And on the y-axis is the percent reached, or the adoption. Okay? So for example, but it doesn't go to the same, it goes to 50%. So for example, if you target 100% of the people and 50% adopt your product, that would be a line right there. And if there's no social effect, if it's just linear response, you get this diagonal line. So you target 40% and 20% respond and so forth. Now, of course, we know that's not really what happens. We all know about the S-shaped diffusion of innovation curve, or the epidemic growth curve. So at low targeting fractions, the social effect works against you and suppresses adoption. Then you get the inflection point, the kind of phase transition. You get the epidemic growth of the adoption or the epidemic, and then you saturate. You can no longer get any more individuals, and the social effect works with you above the line. We're going to actually be able to empirically measure this effect experimentally, which I don't think has been done before, to trace out this type of an orange line by randomly assigning the x-axis. Furthermore, what we fantasize and hope is that we'll be able to shift the curve to the left in an enhanced social effect if the nomination targeting works, such that perhaps we'll be able to show that if you target 20% of the people chosen just right, it's as effective as targeting 100% of the people in the village, which would have big implications, we believe, for public health. All right, let me show you one last experiment, and then I'll close with one sort of big idea, which some of you have heard me present before. This is an experiment that was just published a few months ago, and it's our first experiment that involves the manipulation of position, which I introduced before, and it also takes us in the direction of beginning to use AI. Now, we're not a computer science lab. We're not capable of inventing AlphaGo or Watson or Deep Blue or anything like that, or doing machine learning and stuff. But we are a social science lab, and we are capable of thinking about that. And the way we're thinking about AI is the following way. We're not interested in inventing super smart AI to take the place of human cognition. We're interested in inventing dumb AI to supplement human interaction. We want to make hybrid systems, heterogeneous systems of people and machines, which, because the people in the system are smart, the machines can afford to be stupid. And all the machines have to do is help make the people so that they don't get stuck in social traps, help solve coordination problems. So this experiment tries to do that. We borrowed some ideas from Michael Kearns, who published a color coordination paper about 15 years ago. And in this situation, what happens is you drop people into a graph, and this is a kind of Barabashi preferential attachment model that we've built up here. You drop people into the graph, and you give them a set of colors that they can choose from, and they have to pick a color that's dissimilar than their neighbors. And if they all succeed, and they can change their color every second, if they all succeed in picking a color dissimilar than their neighbors, by the end of the game, it takes about 5 minutes, they get paid. Otherwise, they don't get paid. So it's a model system for human coordination. Can this group work together to solve a collective problem? Now, as you probably all know, maybe you don't, but graphs have a chromatic number, the number of colors needed to color the graph. So this chromatic number for this graph is 3. That is to say, you need at least 3 colors to color it. If you had fewer than 3, then you can't color the graph. And of course, if you had many colors, the problem is easier. So we gave people the exact number of colors they needed, the minimum color, the chromatic number. So they have 3 colors, orange, yellow, and purple. Now they're randomly assigned, and the red lines shows the color conflicts. That is to say, this individual's in conflict with this person, so the tie is red between them. They're both orange, and this is blue because yellow and orange are different colors. And this conflict is what we call a resolvable conflict, because this person, if they wished, could switch to purple, and switching to purple eliminate this conflict. So that's a resolvable conflict. But some people are stuck in unresolvable conflict situations. So this guy can't switch his color, even though he's in conflict with orange, because if he switches his color, he'll be conflict into purple or yellow that he's also connected with. And the objective function is shown here, the number of color conflicts of the 2 types, resolvable and unresolvable. At the beginning, there are 12 conflicts. Time goes by, bang, 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 people are switching their colors. Initially, we put robots in the system, and we had the robots instantaneous, and it drove the humans crazy because the robots were making their decisions on millisecond scales and the humans on second scales. We have to slow the robots way down to make decisions at human scale, about 1.5 seconds. Anyway, this is an all-human system. It's going on. Here they get to the point where they almost solve it. There's one unresolvable conflict. These two guys both have yellow, but neither can make a move that solves the problem. One of them has to make a move that's counterintuitive, that goes against the grain, that temporarily increases conflicts in order to sort of unlock a solution, let's say, which is ultimately what happens, and here the game is solved by 245 seconds. Now what we did in this experiment is we sneakily replaced 3 of the humans with dumb bots. And these bots were programmed so that they just minimize the color conflicts. Every 1.5 seconds they looked around at their neighbors and they picked the color with the minimum conflict. Or we made them a little noisy. We made the bots occasionally deliberately make a mistake, 10% error or 30% error. So they made a little noise or a lot of noise. And we experimentally manipulated where geodesically we put the bots. So here are the 3 treatment conditions: noise, no noise, 10% noise, high noise, 30% noise. And then the 3 geodesic treatments: random positioning, central positioning, or peripheral positioning. And we had 4,000 people that we dropped into 210 different groups. So each of these represents 20, each of these cells represents the outcomes for 20 groups. So we're doing experiments at the group level, not at the individual level. On the y-axis is the probability that the group has not solved the coordination game. So at the beginning, 100% are unsolved, and this goes across time. On the x-axis, have they solved the game or not? And the yellow line indicates the human controls, and the orange line indicates, the purple line indicates, have we treated them with bots or not? And to make the long story short, if we add bots to a central position with 10% noise, we can get the humans, we can outperform the only human groups. So the addition of these simple dumb bots to this social system allows the humans to help themselves, helps accelerate the ability of these groups to solve the problem. In addition, we explored something else, which actually some of you, probably several of you, I'm sure Laszlo and Alessandro know this better than me, but this has tortured me. There's something known as the chromatic polynomial of a graph. Now the chromatic polynomial of a graph, for those of you that don't know, is not the chromatic number, which is what is the number of colors needed to color the graph. It's the number of possible colorings of the graph. How many different ways can you arrange the 3 colors to solve the problem? And it turns out, unsurprisingly, that graphs vary in this, but the part that annoys the hell out of me is that you can't see it. So after 15 years of working, I can see these graphs really well at this point. Like the students bring in something to the lab and I see something and they're like, how did you see that? Well, I just can't. I'm looking at graphs like that. I have been looking at these graphs trying to figure out can I get a clue as to whether it'll have a high or low chromatic polynomial? The answer is I cannot. Maybe you can. I don't know. So the graphs look very similar structurally and otherwise, but they're actually very difficult, have a vary in how difficult they are to solve. So this is a chromatic polynomial. This is a graph that has a solution set of 24. There are 24 different ways you can 3-color this graph. And this also has 24 different ways you can 3-color it. And this graph here has, let's say, 400 ways you can 3-color it. It looks like this one to me. Like I can't tell the difference. And this one has 336. And the parameter space for us in our graphs was between 6 and 12,000. These graphs that we randomly generated to be 3-colorable had the chromatic polynomials between 6 and 12,000. So sometimes the people were dropped into graphs which had many solutions. 12,000 solutions should be easier to solve than a graph which had 6 solutions. And what we found was that the bots were especially helpful when the problem was hard. That is to say, when there was a low chromatic polynomial, the bots with noise really helped the humans to solve the problem. And that's what these results indicate in a cartoonish way. So here, for instance, if you put the bots in the peripheral location when the solution set is small, actually they don't help. You still have at the end these red lines indicating conflicts, but if you put them in the central location, they help the humans to solve the problem. And over here, when the solution set is large, it doesn't matter where you put the bots. The humans are able on their own to solve the problem in both kinds of treatments. Okay, and then finally we found something else which I'm not going to show you results about, and then I'm going to show you one idea and then stop. We found that actually the bots, not only, they didn't work just by making the problem of the humans to whom they were connected easier. The bots created ripples of goodwill in the network. The bots changed the behavior of everyone in the system. Everyone got a little bit noisier as a result of the bots being placed. And so the bots actually helped the humans to help themselves. The whole coordinated group of people did better when these bots were added. Now incidentally, this benefits of noise is an old topic. There was a paper by John Kleinberg on noisy search. Genetic mutation is an example of noise in biological systems, simulated annealing. I mean, physicists have been studying this for a long time. You heat the thing, you cool it back and forth, blah, 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 all that mumbo jumbo. There are lots of ideas that you can borrow from other fields to see the benefits of noise in these types of systems. Okay, let me close then with one final idea that some of you have seen me talk about this before. And this has to do with what it means when we intervene in a social network. Because I think such interventions provide us with a way to manipulate what sociologists call social capital. And to understand or to get one sense of this, consider the question, what's the point of a connected life? How does it help us as individuals and as a species? And it turns out that networks are a resource that we can all use. Networks are a kind of social capital. Now, most people, when they think about capital, think about money. But really, capital is any stock of resources that you can put to productive use. That's what capital is. It's a stock of resources that you can put to productive use. And two further key ideas about capital are that in order to create capital, you have to invest skill and effort. You have to know something and do something in order to create capital. And second, and more subtle, and I've been thinking about this ever since I read Coleman's paper like 20 years ago. This has been torturing me. That in order to create capital, what really the capital creation process is about is that you have to make changes in a substance that make it yield a higher rate of return than it otherwise would. That at its core, what capital creation is about a transformation of the natural world, transforming things from one thing into another. That's what actually creating capital is about. Well, let me give you some examples. You can take this forest and you can invest skill and effort and convert it into a farm. And the farm is more valuable than the forest because you can put it to productive use. You can grow fruits and grains and vegetables and flowers with it, which is not something that you can do with a forest. So you transform the natural world, you endow it with this productive power, and that's what makes it a reservoir of wealth. Or you can take this tree and you can invest skill and effort and make it into lumber. And the lumber is more valuable than the tree because you can do things with the lumber you can't do with a tree. Namely, invest still more skill and effort and make it into a violin. And the violin is more valuable than the lumber because you can do things with a violin you couldn't do with a lumber. Namely, make music. So at each step of the way, you invest skill and effort, you transform the natural world. That transformation is what endows the thing with productive power and is what makes it a reservoir of wealth and therefore a form of capital. Now in the 1960s, spearheaded by Gary Becker primarily and others, scientists began to think about human beings in this fashion. They began to think about human capital. So you can take this dissolute former graduate student of mine, who's a drummer, the Q-tip, the tooth and everything else, and you can clean him up and send him to Alcoholics Anonymous and give him abilities that he didn't have before, such as to invest still more skill and effort and give him an education and give him even more abilities that he didn't have before. So I am right now investing skill and effort, and I'm transforming your minds. I'm transforming the neurons in your brains, hopefully giving you capacities you didn't have before, and making those brains a source of productive power, and therefore a kind of human capital. Now, just like physical capital is created by a change in the material world, and human capital by a change in persons, social capital in organizations, in companies, in communities, in fact in our whole society, is a change in the relations among persons, a change that renders the group more productive and capable of doing things it was not previously able to do. And that's the deepest account I can give you of what social networks mean for our lives and why it is that we use them and can use them to make our world better. Thank you very much.
Nicolas never disappoints, right? I forgot to mention that he's a fantastic speaker, but you saw that for yourself. So I am conflicted now because I'm the next person to talk to him, and we have only 4 minutes for questions. So therefore, I open up the floor, right? Please, yes.
You look at human evolution driving forces for social networks. There seems to be a difference between northern climates, southern climates. I'm wondering if there are different objective functions. Or bigger isn't always better.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, we've not. Our general position has been that there's more that unites us than divides us, so that we believe that the fundamental rules that govern social networks don't vary much around the world. to the extent they do, they're more cultural than biological. So for instance, if you go to Saudi Arabia, you're not going to find many friendships between men and women. This is culturally prohibited, for example. But we believe, and we've mapped networks in Sudan, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Honduras, in India, in several places, many parts of the United States. They all have these very, within ranges, it's similar transitivity, similar degree of sortativity, similar reciprocity, similar degree distributions. And so we think that that's what's going on. So did I answer your question? So I don't think there's much difference. There will be some,
How
but
do you distinguish between genetic effects and just who's most convenient when you're talking about percent?
Well, when we do these, in the studies that we did twin studies. So we did within a population, we've done a number of studies. So what we did is we looked at same-sex dizygotic twins and monozygotic twins. And we mapped the networks of the two, and then we looked at how different are the dizygotic twins networks from each other compared to the monozygotic twins, and did a difference in difference. Now there's a whole critique of twin studies, and so we then followed it up with other work, and we and others are persuaded there's a role, which is not a shocking result, that there's a role of genes in social interactions. Yeah, in the back there. Or I should let Laszlo call.
Sure, go for it.
Oh, okay, you and then you. Yeah.
So your research is fascinating, and your findings about the visibility and invisibility of wealth made me wonder, has there been any work done that ties the changes in technology? So with the internet and television, the visibility of wealth has become far greater.
Yes.
And connecting that to the health of human societies
Yes.
and human happiness.
Yes.
I'm just wondering.
Yes, that's my opinion. I think people have confused things a little bit. I think it's really bad that we have as much inequality as we do now. In the United States, we're at a 100-year high compared to the 1920s. But I think what's especially bad right now is that we have high visibility. So we have drones that fly over billionaires' houses. We've got the lifestyles of the rich and famous. We've got the internet. We've got a different culture of conspicuous consumption. The Vanderbilts and the Roosevelts, the Vanderbilts and the Gettys and the Carnegies and all those Rockefellers, they hid behind their walls. There was a woman 100 years ago in New York. This will blow your mind. At least blew my mind. She had a mansion in New York City. She built a subway for her own rail line, her private rail line, the sole purpose of which rail line was to transport coal to the basement of her house, which coal was burned to cool her house because she had the first air conditioner invented. So this woman was cooling her house, her mansion in New York, with a private rail line that was bringing in coal underground to her house. I mean, the wealth is just mind-blowing. It's like having a fleet of private jets now or something. Anyway, but it was hidden, right? It was underground. You didn't know. It's just her house was there. So I think that the high levels of visibility and inequality now are making things even worse than they otherwise would be. That's my opinion. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, kind of going off of that a little bit with wealth income, seeing around.
Could you speak up just a little bit?
Yeah, going off that implicit bias. So looking at perception. So say if I'm rich and I don't know that I'm rich because everybody else around me is rich, my perception of what it means to be poor might be different. Is it able? Have you looked into
we have not done that to look at, for instance, how does recognition of one's relative standing, how does that affect one's gameplay? Yeah.
I was going to follow up just to say there's the tipping point around everybody. 70% of the people in the model knew what was going on, was visible. You saw the maximum, kind of going to free choice around. At some point, if you're wealthy, is there a tipping point of well, I know I'm wealthy compared to everybody, but I'm going to keep it versus I know it and there's a moral obligation and stuff like that.
So we have a couple of follow-up experiments which we've designed but haven't executed. One involves adding global awareness to the system. So right now they only have 1 degree of separation information. They know their own wealth and the wealth of their neighbors. What if you also just had a little button at the bottom that said, here's the average wealth of your whole society, so that you could benchmark yourself, not just against 1 degree. The other thing that we've been experimentally thinking about is manipulating these starting conditions so that right now the wealth seems like a windfall, so people are randomly assigned to think, oh, I was given this much money or I was given that much money. We could give them a fake task and tell them, based on your performance, you earn this money. And would people who were rich in that world who felt like, oh, I earned this money, I didn't show you because one of the things that didn't break my left-wing heart was that what we found in the paper, you can look at it, is that the rich exploited the poor, actually, in these little societies. And And we think they would exploit the poor even more if they felt that the wealth that they were given at the beginning was deserved, as opposed to just a windfall. Yeah.
Connecting back to your earliest work on the widowhood effect, have you designed experiments on how death or disease has impact on
How would
people?
we do that experimentally? I have one idea. I have an idea. I'll tell you the idea because it's one of my favorite ideas, but I've had the idea for 15 years and I've never been able to do it. So if someone here can do the idea, and especially if you want to work with me, but even if you don't, I'm happy to work with you on this idea. So when I came to Harvard, in 2001, I wanted to do that study. I wanted to take you guys and then randomly assign you spouses and have you married for 20 years and then randomly assign you to shoot your spouse and then see what happens to your survival. And of course, we can't do that experiment, as you know. So what I had in mind was to find an environment in which there was a natural experiment of dead spouses. So then I thought, well, maybe we can look at we looked at historical data for planes that were on the D-Day landing. Like the planes were shot out of the sky at random. Let's look at the surviving women of those men or women whose husbands were shot versus not shot. We worked with some historians. We gave up on that project. Then I had the following idea. What we needed to do was to find a large randomized controlled trial of an effective drug, where people are randomly assigned to get a drug that either afterwards the trialists report, this drug works. The people that were randomly assigned to get this drug did better, survived, where the people that did get it did not survive. And then go find their spouses and see what happened to the survival of the spouses of the people who were randomly assigned these two arms. I spent 5 years of my life trying to find somebody who had done a big trial that had kept records about spouses. And between not being able to find that, IRB, headaches, the data problem, I gave up. But if anyone here knows of an opportunity like that, I'm your guy. We'll do that study.
Let's see the last question here.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about the reveal of the wealth and the effect of the inequality. What does that say about in your case you say like you either reveal for everyone or you don't reveal.
No, we only reveal, everyone is revealed to one degree of separation. So you don't see everyone's information, but everyone sees their first order connections information.
Yeah,
You're asking what if there's heterogeneity in visibility in this?
So I'm saying that in reality people usually choose whether they want to reveal or not. So what does it say for the people who are on the upper half if they choose?
Yes.
Is it better for them to choose to reveal or
Yes,
not?
yes, great idea. We have designed an experiment on that as well, where like the rewiring branch, we give them at each time step the opportunity to choose whether we also have a variant in which you can pay a little penalty to reveal your alters in wealth. Like if you pay a nickel, then everyone around you will get to see how much they have. So forced revelation versus voluntary revelation. So we've given some thought to those ideas. We haven't explored them yet.
Do you have any hypothesis of how this would affect that? Will it be better if you reveal, if you're on the lower half?
So sometimes when we do experiments, the experiment is like an experiment crucius, that is to say there's theoretical debate and the experiment can resolve the debate, and that's very exciting. But often when we do experiments, it's not clear. That is to say, we don't know what's going to happen. We have a paper right now where we have a bunch of very counterintuitive results. The experiment's very well done. I believe there are results, but it's unclear. So I can't predict what would happen in that situation. I can tell you stories either way in advance. So that's why I'm going to do the experiment. I could do the experiment to see.
Because my intuition is that, like if you're on the lower half of the income and you think that revealing the income for everyone will decrease inequality, then I would probably try to reveal my income, because then if everybody does, if I encourage everybody else to do that, then we will reach lower inequality.
Because you think that rich people will take sympathy on you and be nice to you? Because other people will think, oh my God, I better hide the fact that I'm poor because the rich will exploit me. Tell the story either way.
So I think now we're all enriched with the social capital.
Yes.